PowerPoint for Chapter 12, and within your study, we should now be to implications, conclusions, and recommendations for further study. And what you write in this part of your paper is the part that you'll really use when you go on your interviews and meet with similar retailers as the study that you conducted, in which you can tell them how it'll show your analytical and thinking skills, and that you've really thought and come up with, recommendations that could actually help with their company because you've done a study that related to their industry and what they're doing now. And it just shows that you know how to problem solve and think on your feet, and that you've been thinking also about that specific industry or that type of company, and that's something that you want to do once you're done and out of school. So when you look at conclusions for using them in a quantitative study, with quantitative data, the conclusions are stated in relation to your hypothesis and your results, or your research question. So for a lot of you, it'll probably be your research question. And this is really the last part of a research project, and then you're done. And in the conclusions from your research, you relate it back to your population and the context of the study. So for example, your would be, a survey was done using millennials that looked at blah, blah, blah. So there you're relating it back to the population and then bringing in the context of your study. And conclusions are reviewed in relation to the purpose, hypothesis, and the theory of your research. So this means you go back and you say, the reason I did this was because, and this is what I came up with, and this is what I think about the results I found. So you're just giving them, you want to review what you found in relation to your hypothesis or your research question and your purpose, and just kind of tell them what you found and why you found what you did. So when writing your conclusion, you want to list each hypothesis or research question, and then after that you want to say hypothesis 1 or research question 1 was accepted or rejected. And you're going to do the same thing for each research question. And you want to say whether you thought you would find what you did, or did you not find what you thought you would find. So just tell them, this is what this was accepted, this is what I thought I would find, or no, it was rejected, and this is because we found this, which was not what I thought we would find. Next looks at validity, and we've been talking about reliability and validity throughout this class. And with your conclusions, you want to show validity in your research in that there is a relationship between the variables that you used, and did the question truly measure what you wanted it to measure. If you come up with some random answer that you probably did not intend to measure, then you didn't measure what you were expecting to measure. And in qualitative research, many times you'll come up with weird things that you weren't thinking about or didn't even think would weigh into the factors. But with your quantitative study, really everything should relate back to your variables that you've chosen, unless you did not state your questions correctly. Next, you want to look at internal validity. And internal validity is causal, so it's connecting the relationships. So you'd say this caused that. Example would be cold weather caused an increase of sales of winter clothing. So cause and effect. Cold weather caused increased sales of winter clothing. Or the extended hot summer increased the sales of summer clothes. So internal validity is a causal relationship. Another example of an internal validity of a causal relationship would be, do you believe using a handheld POS system increases commission for employees? So the causal relationship between sales and using a POS system. That's what you're looking at. Next is external validity. And an example of this is saying a handheld POS system works great at a big department store, so they will work well at any retailer. So then you're generalizing it to other places or people. But however, this does not always work because using a handheld POS system would probably not work well with Walmart, considering that they tend to get rid of self-checkout at some stores because of the amount of theft. So you would have to say, you could say it would be successful at other large department stores as well. And that would be a correct generalization. So you need to generalize to the population or to the people that it would work for and not to everyone. So now we're going to look at an example. And this is from a study that was done in 1988 by the Army. And they did a survey because their sizing for their uniforms, they were having a lot of issues with it. So they tried to make the sizing for all body types, men and women, because everything had originally been made for men. So they wanted to try to change their sizing to fit women too better. So they came up with their own sizing system and came up with their own standard of measurements that would fit everyone within the Army better. And what they found is that in the U.S., there's no standard sizing system used in the commercial apparel manufacturing sector. So everyone just does their own sizing. So each different retailer or manufacturer or designer comes up with their own sizing. And one of the conclusions from this research is that they had that sizing is often used as a marketing tool. So they learned that retailers who sell high priced garments use a smaller size for a larger body dimension. So they're changing the sizes to seem smaller than they really should be on the general scale. An example kind of someone who does this is Chico's. They tend to change their sizing. It's 0 to 4. So you can say you're a 4 instead of having to say you're a size 16 to 18. So the implications of this study were that manufacturers and the Army used different finish measurements for the same size garment. An example of this, if you look at other countries, would be that if you look at the sizes from U.S. sizes to, say, sizes in Hong Kong, a size, someone that wears like a size small in the U.S. would wear a size large or extra large in Hong Kong. So everything is so tiny in for them. So in China, sizes can change. And because the U.S. population is becoming so diverse with different ethnicities, it makes it very hard to fit garments for all different types of people because different ethnicities are made different. Either they'll have a longer torso, or they'll have longer legs, or they're just more petite in general. So trying to fit all different types of people has made it really hard for the U.S. in general to have sizing that fits. And you can look at an example. This whole example that we've been looking at is on page 243 of your book, of kind of how the study went, and it gives you an example of their implications and conclusions and what they were planning to do for further study, just to kind of help you when you're writing your conclusions and implications and recommendations. So the next slide is what they said for further study. Is they said that the Army said they wanted to come up with a 3D body scanner in order to determine more accurate sizing for the Army. And they expected that by doing this, that they can better fit their soldiers and that they can save up to 50% in their current overbuy of uniforms and equipment, which would be a huge savings to the military. Next is your discussion section. And in discussion, it It's included as part of the conclusions or a separate heading. And this is where you discuss everything and interpret, and where you tell what you think about the study. It stumps most people in academia because conclusions cannot be in depth enough. By the time you get to this, you're just so over your study that it's really all you want to do is get it over with. And this is where you need to be real detailed in your discussions, and you want to discuss the relationship between the purpose, hypothesis, and results. And you want to interpret the meaning of results, including accepting or rejecting the hypothesis. You also want to relate your study to previous studies mentioned in your review of literature. So looking at an example of how you would relate the study to previous studies, an example would be so-and-so researcher found in 1986 that peers influence teens' purchases the most, their peers do. However, the researcher in this study found that parents influence teens' purchases more than their peers. So that'd be kind of an example of how you would relate it back to a previous study. Next, we're going to look at the limitations of the study. And simple limitation of a study example would be if you were doing a qualitative study, is if you were doing a focus group and instead of serving water to your participants, if you served them wine instead, your study would probably go on forever, and the answers that you would probably get from your survey may be a little strange if people had too much wine. So that's kind of like a silly example of a limitation. Another thing to look at is, does the sample represent the population? So in your studies that you will do, it will be a convenient sample and not random sampling. So a limitation of your study will be that it does not represent the population accurately because it's not random sampling. We did convenient sampling. Also, you need to talk about if there was an unanticipated variable that may have influenced the study. An example of this would be remember how we mentioned an example of using a portable POS system. Well, those systems can lose their Wi-Fi signal often, but you may have not have thought about that before you did your study. So that would be an unanticipated variable that may affect consumer sales and customer satisfaction because the POS system is not working correctly. So that would be something that you would need to talk about in your limitations of your study. Also, you can have something occur in society that may influence your study. For example, there could be a severe weather storm the day that the data was collected. And so because of that, you didn't get the same participants as you thought, or because of that, it may have affected how they answered the study. Or say if the market dropped and there was a recession expected, then the answer that you may get from consumers about their buying habits may be different than they would have been a few days ago. So you always have to look at factors that can influence consumer attitudes and behaviors that would influence the results for that particular time and place. We're going to look at conclusions with qualitative data. And the researcher in qualitative data wants to review the data and write a discussion of the meaning of the collected data with detailed descriptions, placing the data in the social context of time, place, and the group studied. This is where you talk about how you conducted the interviews. Then you talk about where they took place, what time of day, and who was in your group. For example, on a typical day, what do you wear so you can get the context of the group's dress for each of your group? So you could talk about the dress of each group. You could talk about anything that relates to what you're studying that would help others reading this understand it. You also have to tell the story and draw a mental picture of your group, and also you can even take pictures of your group to let people know who was in your group and to get more information about who you were studying. Looking at interpretation of results, you look at what activities, actions, or observations occur that influence the researcher's decision. And in this, you would include why you labeled certain categories a certain way. Or an example would be if you were looking at people that were out shopping, why did you label certain people shoppers and certain people browsers? And you can include racial background and explain why this was included, why it was important to your study, what characteristics were included in your study to determine ethnicity or racial background. You also want to describe how you determined why you placed subject in the category based on visual factors. For example, you need to describe the shopping center you were at where you were watching people shop, and then what criteria did you use to determine if consumers were shoppers or browsers. So you want to spell everything out for someone if they wanted to repeat the study. So the importance of interpretation of results is just you have to think of all the things that you're thinking about in your mind when you either label categories or place subjects in a category, and explain why you did what you did and what factors made you put them in those categories. Next is limiting categories. And there's an example in your book of limiting categories, and it's of how interpretation of factors may limit the way you choose your categories or groupings from a certain viewpoint. So in the example above, you must determine if someone is a true sports fan or merely a follower. So you take a chance when you decide these things, how to determine if someone is really a fan or is actually just a follower. Next, you need to talk about your models or theories, and you need to make recommendations for either revising the theory based on your results or formulating a theory based on your results. We will not be doing this because y'all probably will not be really using a theory, but if you were doing a more like your dissertation or thesis or academic research, many times you would be either formulating a model or a theory or making new recommendations to a theory or a model. Then looking at implications, you can make up a new theory based on your results, or you can add to a theory within your implications. You would talk about this. And you want to look at the relationships that are important to your study. You want to look at the meanings related to the individual, the group, the field, or the discipline, which would be the fashion industry. And you want to look at your knowledge gained. So what did you gain from this study that others might want to know from that? When you look at the limitations of the study, and quantitative and qualitative, you want to look at the special circumstances in the process. You want to look at extenuating circumstances that influence the outcome. And these can include size, demographics, or availability of the sample. And for yours, it would be a convenient sample. Your tone needs to be impartial and without bias. So you don't title your survey when you do it because it brings bias into the study and they know what you are looking for. So you want to try not to persuade them with anything that you're doing. And it needs to be stated in a logical manner. And it's based on collected data and results that you have found. And also your results and your conclusions need to relate to the original research questions and hypothesis. So once again, everything is going back to that research question. Next is implications in a quantitative study. And this is where you get your so what factor or what you need to know. And this is where you refer directly to the study's hypothesis, model, or theory. You're going to include a discussion of the logical use of the information. And an example of this, of an implication, might be in my research. An example would be in a research looking at visual displays, we found that there is a triangle pattern that people look at when they look at a display first, and they're drawn to the top of the pyramid, and then their visual looks out from there and widens. And talk about how this would affect retailers' visual displays in their stores and what they set beside those visual displays. And your implications, you want to show how your findings can be used by apparel manufacturers, designers, retailers, or other fashion professionals. Next are implications in a qualitative study. And you must justify your results and your conclusions in your qualitative study, and you also include the development of your concept, construct, model, or theory. And an example of implications in a qualitative study would be something kind of like this. Red is the best color for wall displays when doing visuals because within our FET study we found that consumers, when choosing colors, they liked red and saw red as a color that made them want to buy. And last is some recommendations for further study. And this is where you make suggestions for change. You talk about any unsolved issues that you had in your study. And this is where you talk about where you need to either narrow or broaden your topic. You also look at any additional information that you need before redoing or repeating your study. And often you list in your recommendations if you want to read, study, or talk about other approaches or interrelationships to add to your study. You also talk about different ways to do your research design if you decide to change it. And this is where you also provide a plan for upcoming work for yourself or for other investigators that want to do your topic. And it gives a useful plan to people within the fashion industry of what questions they want to investigate in the future that relate to your topic.